Ladies and gentlemen, when you find yourself trapped in the psychological maze created by a narcissist, there is something deeply disturbing you need to recognize. Their desire for control can sometimes go far beyond manipulation, jealousy, or winning an argument. In the darkest forms of narcissistic behavior, their fixation can become centered on seeing another person completely defeated. They may want to strip you of your confidence, your identity, your relationships, and everything that makes you feel alive. The warning signs are not always obvious. Sometimes they appear through subtle comments, strange reactions, or an unsettling lack of compassion when you are suffering. Today, we are going to examine those darker patterns and understand what they can reveal about someone who seems determined to watch you collapse rather than simply walk away from you. When someone with strong narcissistic traits becomes consumed with your downfall, the first warning sign may exist in their attitude rather than their obvious behavior. You may notice an unusual fascination with your mistakes, disappointments, or moments of weakness. Instead of comforting you when something goes wrong, they seem strangely entertained by it. Instead of encouraging your recovery, they appear disappointed when you begin finding your strength again. Their reactions can reveal more than their words ever will. A sarcastic comment may arrive at exactly the moment you are most vulnerable. A smile may appear when you receive bad news. A joke may be disguised as humor while carrying an unmistakably cruel message. These moments can leave you wondering whether you are imagining things. But when the same pattern keeps repeating, it deserves your attention because repeated cruelty is rarely accidental. For a narcissistic person, another person's suffering can sometimes become psychologically meaningful because it reinforces their sense of superiority. Your pain may become evidence that they still have influence over you. Your emotional reaction tells them that they can still reach inside your mind and disturb your peace. Instead of responding to your tears with compassion, they may experience a sense of satisfaction because your distress confirms that they still hold power. This is why their cruelty can feel so calculated. It is not always about the original disagreement anymore. The deeper issue becomes dominance. They want to know that they can affect your confidence, your decisions, your emotions, and even your sense of reality. The more visibly affected you become, the more important they may feel. Your suffering becomes a distorted measurement of their power, and that can make the cycle increasingly difficult to break. They rarely announce these darker intentions directly. Instead, disturbing ideas may be hidden inside sarcasm, threatening jokes, insults, or statements designed to make you feel powerless. You might hear something like, "You would never manage without me," or "You will realize what you lost eventually." On the surface, these statements can sound like arrogance or wounded pride, but when they appear alongside intimidation, humiliation, stalking, threats, or escalating retaliation, they should not simply be dismissed as words. The pattern matters. Someone who repeatedly celebrates your failures, threatens your future, or becomes hostile whenever you regain independence may be revealing something important about their mindset. It is also important not to assume that every narcissistic person secretly wants physical harm to come to someone. Narcissism exists on a spectrum, and behavior varies widely. What matters most is taking concrete threats and escalating behavior seriously. One of the most revealing moments comes when you begin recovering. A person who genuinely cares about you may feel relieved when you regain confidence after a painful period, but someone invested in controlling you may react very differently. Your healing can make them uncomfortable because it demonstrates that their influence is weakening. Suddenly, the person they once manipulated is making decisions without seeking approval. They are rebuilding friendships. They are laughing again. They are making plans. They are becoming emotionally independent. Instead of celebrating that progress, the narcissistic person may become colder, more critical, or strangely irritated. Your strength becomes a threat because it proves you can exist without their permission. That is why some controlling relationships become more volatile when the targeted person starts pulling away. Independence removes the very thing the narcissist was trying to maintain: access, influence, and control. There is another layer that can be even more damaging, and it begins with the destruction of your identity. Before someone attempts to completely dominate your life, they may gradually weaken the way you see yourself. It rarely happens overnight. Instead, small criticisms accumulate until your confidence starts collapsing under their weight. They question your decisions, mock your judgment, dismiss your opinions, and make you second-guess abilities you once trusted without hesitation. At first, these comments may be disguised as concern. They might say they are only trying to help you improve. But eventually, you notice that almost everything about you has become a target. Your appearance, intelligence, career, friendships, dreams, and personality are all criticized. The objective, whether consciously planned or simply reinforced by the relationship dynamic, is the same. Make you trust their judgment more than your own. The most dangerous part is how easily this can become internalized. When criticism comes from someone close to you every day, you may eventually begin repeating their words inside your own mind. You start asking yourself whether you really are incompetent, difficult, unattractive, selfish, or incapable. The external critic becomes an internal voice. You stop making decisions confidently because you are already anticipating their disapproval. You may ask permission for things that never required permission before. You may apologize for having ordinary needs. You may even feel guilty for wanting happiness. This is how psychological control becomes powerful. The narcissist no longer needs to criticize you every minute because their voice has already been installed inside your thinking. You begin policing yourself for them. And once that happens, the relationship can feel impossible to escape because the chains are no longer visible. Isolation can deepen that process. A controlling partner may repeatedly portray your friends as dangerous, your family as jealous, or anyone who questions the relationship as someone who does not understand you. Sometimes there may be genuine conflicts with particular people, but the warning sign is when almost everyone outside the relationship is gradually painted as a problem. Little by little, you may stop calling friends because you know it will create an argument. You may avoid family gatherings because you do not want another confrontation. Eventually, your social world becomes smaller. The narcissist then occupies more space in your emotional life because fewer outside voices remain to challenge their version of events. When someone becomes your only source of validation and reality, their influence becomes much stronger. Isolation is therefore not merely loneliness. In a controlling relationship, it can become a mechanism that makes manipulation easier. Once your outside support has weakened, the narcissist may begin attacking the things that once made you feel most alive. Your hobbies suddenly become childish. Your career becomes insignificant. Your accomplishments are treated as luck. Your creative interests are mocked. The dreams that once excited you are presented as unrealistic or embarrassing. You may begin abandoning pieces of yourself simply to avoid criticism. Eventually you look around and realize that many of the activities that once brought you happiness have disappeared from your life. This is why identity erosion can be so devastating. They are not merely criticizing individual choices. The repeated message becomes that the authentic version of you is somehow unacceptable. If enough of your interests, relationships, ambitions, and values are dismantled, you may begin adapting your entire personality around keeping the relationship peaceful. That is when many survivors describe feeling as though they have disappeared while still being physically present. They recognize their face in the mirror, but they no longer recognize the person looking back. Their confidence has weakened. Their excitement has faded. Their goals have become distant. Their decisions revolve around avoiding conflict rather than pursuing fulfillment. This emotional numbness can feel like being alive without actually living. It is important to understand that this does not mean the narcissist has literally destroyed your soul or that your identity is permanently gone. It means prolonged psychological abuse can profoundly affect how a person experiences themselves. The hopeful truth is that what was weakened can be rebuilt. Your personality, confidence, relationships, interests, and sense of purpose can gradually return when you are no longer constantly being told that they are wrong. Another major warning sign appears when control becomes the central obsession of the relationship. At that point, it is no longer simply about influencing your decisions. The person wants access to everything. They want to know where you are, who you are speaking with, what you are doing, and why you made a particular choice. Questions that might normally come from ordinary curiosity can become interrogations when they are constant, accusatory, and designed to monitor rather than understand you. Who called you? Why did they message you? Where were you? Why didn't you answer immediately? What did you talk about? When these questions become a regular pattern, accompanied by accusations, anger, or punishment, they can function as surveillance. Your privacy becomes suspicious in their eyes, and your independence starts being treated as betrayal. Control usually grows gradually, which is why people often fail to recognize it during the beginning stages. It may start with something that sounds almost harmless. They suggest a different outfit. They express an opinion about one friend. They tell you that a certain career choice is foolish. They claim they are simply protecting you from people who might hurt you. Then the suggestions become expectations. The expectations become rules. The rules become consequences. Eventually, you are modifying your behavior before they even say anything, because you already know what reaction will follow. You stop wearing certain clothes. You stop seeing certain people. You change how you speak. You avoid subjects that might trigger their anger. What began as occasional criticism has transformed into a system where your choices are shaped by fear of their response. And this is where control can become especially exhausting because compliance rarely satisfies it. You may think that if you simply explain yourself better, avoid certain mistakes, answer messages faster, or give them more reassurance, the tension will finally disappear. But the standard keeps moving. Once one boundary is surrendered, another becomes the next demand. Once they know they can influence one decision, they may push for control over another. You give up your privacy to prevent an argument, then your friendships to prevent jealousy, then your independence to prevent anger. Yet the promised peace never truly arrives. Instead, the relationship becomes increasingly centered around managing their reactions. The more control you surrender, the more control they expect. And eventually you realize that the issue was never that you were doing something wrong. The issue was that they wanted you to stop being fully autonomous. They are not looking for balance. They are looking for complete submission. When a narcissistic person realizes that they can no longer dictate your choices, they may begin viewing your remaining independence as a challenge. The strength you still possess becomes evidence that their influence is not absolute. And when control is central to their identity, losing that control can trigger intense reactions. Their behavior may become increasingly possessive, intrusive, or retaliatory. What makes this especially disturbing is the personal nature of the conflict. You are not dealing with an abstract disagreement. You are dealing with someone who may have become deeply invested in having authority over your decisions and emotions. The more you reclaim your freedom, the more resistance you may encounter. They may monitor your behavior, exploit vulnerabilities, manipulate circumstances, and repeatedly test your boundaries, searching for any opening they can use. This constant pressure can leave you emotionally exhausted. You begin questioning simple decisions because you already know that independence may bring another confrontation. You think twice before speaking, hesitate before making plans, and wonder what reaction will follow if you refuse to cooperate. Meanwhile, the controlling person may continue studying your habits, relationships, fears, and emotional triggers. Every piece of information can become another instrument for manipulation. What once looked like ordinary curiosity begins feeling like surveillance. What once sounded like concern starts resembling interrogation. And the more you resist, the more intensely they may attempt to regain influence. It is important, however, not to assume that every narcissistic person intends physical destruction. Narcissistic behavior can vary dramatically from person to person. The real warning sign is escalating coercion, threats, stalking, intimidation, or retaliation. Those behaviors should always be taken seriously, rather than explained away as ordinary relationship conflict. Another particularly damaging strategy involves attacking your reputation instead of confronting you directly. Rather than openly challenging you, a narcissistic person may attempt to influence how other people perceive you. This can happen through selective storytelling, exaggeration, private complaints, insinuations, or carefully presented half-truths. The objective is to create doubt around your character while presenting themselves as reasonable and innocent. They may tell someone about an argument, but conveniently leave out the behavior that caused it. They may describe your emotional reaction without mentioning what happened immediately before it. They may portray themselves as patient and compassionate while subtly suggesting that you are unstable, difficult, selfish, or impossible to understand. This kind of reputation damage can be incredibly difficult to defend against because you are often responding to a story you did not even know was being told. By the time you realize something has changed, other people may already have formed an opinion. Smear campaigns can develop slowly, which makes them especially difficult to identify. You may notice that friends suddenly seem uncomfortable around you. Someone who once communicated openly becomes distant. A colleague behaves differently without explaining why. Family members begin asking strange questions or treating you as though they have heard something concerning. You feel the atmosphere changing, but you cannot identify the source. Meanwhile, the narcissistic person may continue acting completely normal. They may appear charming, generous, wounded, or concerned, while quietly shaping the narrative behind the scenes. This creates a painful imbalance because you are defending yourself against accusations that may never be presented directly. You may find yourself trying to prove something that nobody has openly accused you of doing. That confusion can become part of the damage itself. Your attention shifts from living your life to constantly wondering what has been said about you. The deeper objective of reputation attacks is often isolation. If enough people begin questioning your credibility, you may become hesitant to seek support. You start wondering whether anyone will believe your experience. Instead of reaching outward, you retreat inward. The social network that once grounded you becomes smaller and less reliable. This can leave you feeling as though you are standing alone in a world that no longer recognizes the person you know yourself to be. The narcissistic person does not necessarily need to destroy every relationship directly. Sometimes it is enough to create enough suspicion that other people begin distancing themselves on their own. Every rumor adds another layer of uncertainty. Every distorted story creates another barrier between you and potential support. Eventually, you may feel as though your reputation has been taken away from you. The most damaging part is not simply what others believe, but how their doubt can begin changing what you believe about yourself. This is why early awareness matters. Sudden changes in relationships should not automatically be blamed on one person, because misunderstandings and ordinary social conflicts happen all the time. But when you repeatedly notice the same pattern of unexplained distance, distorted stories, character attacks, and private accusations, it deserves careful attention. Keep records of important interactions when necessary, communicate directly with trustworthy people, and avoid allowing yourself to become completely isolated. Most importantly, remember that someone else's version of you does not automatically become the truth. A manipulative person may attempt to control the story because controlling the story makes controlling the person easier. If they can convince everyone else that you are the problem, they can dismiss your concerns without addressing their own behavior. Your responsibility is not to win every person back. Your responsibility is to remain anchored in reality and protect the relationships that are genuinely safe. Another disturbing pattern appears when someone seems to derive satisfaction from your emotional suffering. Instead of becoming concerned when you are overwhelmed, they may provoke you further. Instead of helping you calm down, they may continue pushing until you react. Then they use your reaction as evidence that you are unstable or unreasonable. The cycle becomes self-reinforcing. They create the emotional pressure, wait for you to respond, and then point to your response as proof that their accusations were justified. Their satisfaction may not always be obvious. It can appear through a smirk, a sarcastic comment, an unnecessary provocation, or an oddly calm reaction when you are falling apart. Sometimes they even pretend to comfort you while subtly reminding you that they were right all along. The result is the same. Your emotional pain becomes another opportunity for them to establish superiority. At first, these behaviors may appear insignificant. One cutting remark can be dismissed. One cruel joke can be explained away. One humiliating comment can be blamed on a bad mood. But repeated incidents create a different picture. Every insult chips away at your confidence. Every sarcastic dismissal teaches you to question your own reactions. Every deliberate provocation creates another opportunity for them to accuse you of being too emotional. Over time, you may become increasingly careful around them, constantly monitoring your words because you are afraid of giving them another reason to attack. This is where psychological manipulation becomes especially powerful. You begin changing yourself to prevent their behavior, even though their behavior is their responsibility. You may believe that if you stay calm enough, explain yourself perfectly, or stop reacting altogether, the relationship will finally become peaceful. But manipulation often adapts rather than disappears. The outside world may have difficulty understanding what is happening because the narcissistic person can present an entirely different version of themselves publicly. They may appear warm, generous, patient, responsible, or deeply caring. They may be the person everyone describes as helpful and charming. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, you experience criticism, intimidation, emotional punishment, and constant confusion. This split presentation can make you question your own experience. You hear other people praising the person who has been hurting you, and you begin wondering whether you somehow misunderstood everything. Maybe you are too sensitive. Maybe you are exaggerating. Maybe you are the difficult one. That uncertainty can become devastating because trust in yourself is essential for recognizing unhealthy behavior. When someone repeatedly causes you to distrust your own perception, they become much easier to control you. That is why rebuilding self-trust is such an important part of recovering your independence. The darker part of this dynamic is the desire to create a life in which you no longer have influence. This does not necessarily mean they want you physically harmed. Often the goal is social and emotional erasure. They may begin preparing for life without you by creating new relationships, strengthening alliances, finding new sources of attention, or presenting themselves as someone who has completely moved forward. They may quickly replace the role you once occupied. To you, this can feel cold and confusing, especially if the relationship ended recently. But their behavior may be less about genuine emotional closure and more about controlling the narrative surrounding the ending. They want to appear unaffected. They want to be seen as the person who walked away stronger. They may emphasize their success while minimizing your importance. The message becomes, "You were never necessary." This can be especially painful because it attempts to rewrite the significance of everything you experienced together. They may also begin rewriting the history of the relationship itself. Events that you remember clearly are described differently. Their harmful behavior becomes your fault. Their cruelty becomes a reaction to your supposed shortcomings. Their betrayal becomes something you supposedly caused. Gradually, they construct a story in which they were the victim and you were the source of every problem. This is not merely about protecting their reputation. It can also help them avoid confronting their own behavior. If they can make you responsible for everything that happened, they never have to acknowledge what they did. They can walk away believing they were justified while encouraging everyone around them to accept the same version. This is why you may feel like your history has been stolen. The events happened, but the meaning attached to those events is being rewritten. Protecting your own understanding of what happened becomes an important part of preserving your identity. Sometimes the most confusing stage is when they suddenly become calm. The arguments decrease. The accusations become less frequent. They appear detached, almost indifferent. You may initially believe that things are finally improving. Sometimes they genuinely are. But calmness alone does not prove that someone has changed. A person can become quiet because they are emotionally finished, because they have found another source of attention, or because they have decided to stop engaging in the same conflict. You should not automatically interpret silence as evidence of a secret plan or impending catastrophe. What matters is the overall behavioral pattern. If calmness arrives alongside threats, stalking, intimidation, escalating retaliation, or attempts to isolate you, then the situation deserves serious attention. But if someone simply moves on and becomes less reactive, it may be ordinary disengagement rather than something sinister. Understanding that distinction protects you from both minimizing genuine danger and becoming trapped in fear. The most important thing is to stop allowing another person's need for control to define your existence. You do not have to accept their version of you simply because they repeat it confidently. You do not have to surrender your relationships because someone demands isolation. You do not have to abandon your ambitions because someone mocks them. And you do not have to keep proving your worth to someone who benefits from making you doubt it. Protect your boundaries, maintain connections with trustworthy people, document serious incidents when appropriate, and seek professional or legal support if threats or intimidation become part of the situation. Your safety matters more than winning an argument, your reality matters more than their narrative, and your future does not have to be determined by the version of you they tried to create. The moment you begin rebuilding your confidence and making decisions from your own values again, their influence starts losing the power you once believed it had. A narcissistic person's attempt to control the story does not mean they control the ending. They may try to convince others that you are the problem, but you can still choose integrity over retaliation. They may attempt to isolate you, but you can rebuild genuine connections. They may have spent months or years weakening your confidence, but confidence can return through small decisions made consistently in your own favor. Recovery is not about becoming stronger than the narcissist. It is about becoming less dependent on their approval, less frightened by their disapproval, and more connected to your own judgment. You do not need to destroy them to become free. You do not need everyone to believe your story. You need enough clarity to recognize what happened, enough courage to protect yourself, and enough patience to rebuild the parts of your life that were pushed into the background. Their version of your ending is not the only ending available to you. And perhaps the most important thing to understand at the end of all of this is that your story does not have to end where their control began. When you have spent enough time around manipulation, criticism, emotional punishment, and constant psychological pressure, it becomes easy to believe that the other person has the final word over your life. You may begin measuring your choices by their reactions, your worth by their approval, and your peace by whether they are pleased with you. But that is exactly what you have to unlearn. Their opinion is not the authority over your identity. Their anger is not proof that you did something wrong. Their rejection does not define your value. And their attempt to rewrite your story does not erase what you experienced. The moment you begin separating their version of you from the person you actually are, something inside you begins to return. You start remembering that your life existed before their influence, and it can exist beautifully after it. One of the hardest things about recovering from narcissistic abuse is accepting that you may never receive the explanation, apology, accountability, or closure you deserved. You may spend countless hours wondering why they treated you the way they did. You may replay conversations, search for hidden meanings, and imagine different choices you could have made. You may ask yourself whether you could have been more patient, more understanding, more loving, or less reactive. But eventually, healing requires you to stop making yourself responsible for another person's decision to hurt, manipulate, deceive, or control you. Understanding their psychology can help you recognize patterns, but understanding them should never become another form of staying attached to them. You do not need to solve their mind before you are allowed to move forward. You do not need to understand every motive before you can protect yourself. Sometimes the clearest answer is simply recognizing that the behavior was harmful and deciding that you no longer want to participate in it.